I've spent the last few months replaying everything in my mind. Every choice. Every moment. Every mistake that led me here. I'm not proud of what I'm about to share. But it's my truth. And I need to say it out loud. Even if it means you might hate me for it. Maybe I deserve that. I'm Sarah Miller. 23 years old. And 3 months ago, I married the man I thought I'd spend forever with, Jake Thompson. My high school sweetheart. My first love. My everything. We've been together since I was 15. And he was 17. I don't think there's ever been a version of me that didn't revolve around Jake. He was my anchor. My safe place. My entire world. Jake was the kind of person who lit up every room without even trying. The star quarterback who'd rather help freshmen with their homework than go to after-game parties. The guy every girl wanted. But he only had eyes for me. Back then, I was the cheerleading captain. And he was the football hero. It sounds like a cliché. I know. But we were different. What we had was real. Or at least, I thought it was. Jake was the kind of person who'd give up everything for the people he loved. And for me, he did exactly that. When we graduated, he turned down a full scholarship to Stanford. Just to attend a local college where I could get in. He didn't care about the opportunities he was giving up. As long as we were together. That was Jake. Always putting me first. He made me feel like I mattered more than anything else in the world. When I struggled with college, hating every minute of it, Jake started working right away so I could drop out. He never judged me. Never made me feel less than. He just wanted me to be happy. After graduation, he landed a job at a Silicon Valley tech company. Everyone said he was destined for success. And they were right. He worked his way up quickly, pulling long hours to make sure we had everything we needed. The beautiful house in a good neighborhood. The lifestyle I'd always dreamed of. He gave me all of it. I tell you this because I need you to understand that I love Jake. I love him with every fiber of my being. And I'm not just saying that to sound good or justify anything. Jake is the person I built my whole life around. The person I wanted to grow old with. The person I never thought I could hurt. But here's the thing they don't tell you about love. Sometimes it isn't enough. I never imagined I'd feel this kind of emptiness. This loneliness. Even while being married to someone like Jake. Maybe that's on me. Maybe I'm just selfish. But after we got married, things started to change. Or maybe they'd been changing for a while. And I didn't want to see it. Jake's job became more demanding. The hours got longer. The pressure more intense. He'd come home exhausted. Barely able to hold a conversation. Let alone spend real time with me. The guy who used to wake up at 5 a.m. to hit the gym with me. Who'd make me laugh until I couldn't breathe. Who'd surprise me with spontaneous date nights. He wasn't there anymore. He stopped working out altogether. And while I know it sounds shallow, it felt like he was giving up on himself. On us. The six-pack he was so proud of in college. The one I used to trace with my fingers while we lay in bed. Faded away. He wasn't unhealthy. But the spark. The energy that had once been so magnetic. It wasn't there anymore. And then there was the intimacy. It faded slowly at first. Then all at once. We went from passionate, spontaneous nights to barely touching. When we did, it felt mechanical, like something we were supposed to do, not something we wanted to. I'd try to talk to him about it, but he'd just say he was tired. That work was draining him. And I believed him because he wasn't lying. He was exhausted. He was doing everything he could to support us, to build the life we dreamed of. But I needed more. I needed him to see me, to want me. And he didn't. Not anymore. I started feeling invisible in my own marriage, questioning everything. Was this what the rest of my life was going to look like? Me waiting for him to come home, only to watch him fall asleep on the couch? Me craving his attention while he barely noticed me anymore? I knew he loved me. I knew he was trying. But love didn't feel like enough when the loneliness became unbearable. And then Chris Walker entered the picture. Jake's college friend. Someone I'd met briefly at our wedding, but never really got to know. When he started coming around more often, I didn't think much of it at first. Jake seemed happy that I was finally getting along with one of his friends. Chris was different from Jake in every way. Where Jake had let himself go, Chris was a personal trainer who looked like he'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. Where Jake was quiet and reserved, Chris was outgoing and magnetic. He could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within minutes. At first, it was innocent. Chris would come over to hang out with Jake. But Jake was always working late. So we'd wait for him together, watching Netflix, talking about everything and nothing. I didn't think much of it. He was Jake's friend after all. But the more we talked, the more I realized how easy it was with Chris. He made me laugh. He made me feel heard. And when Jake wasn't there, Chris filled the silence that had been suffocating me for months. Jake was still excited about how well Chris and I got along. I remember one night he joked, "I should leave you two alone more often. You seem to have more fun without me." I laughed. But it stung. Not because of what he said, but because there was some truth in it. I was having fun. Too much fun. And it wasn't with my husband. When I think back to those moments with Chris, I tell myself they started innocently. At least that's what I wanted to believe at the time. I never set out to betray Jake. I wasn't looking for someone else. But Chris was there. And he made me feel things I hadn't felt in so long. It started small. Little things that didn't seem like they meant anything at the time. Like the way he'd always notice if I did something different with my hair, or wore a new dress. Jake used to notice those things too. But lately, I could have dyed my hair bright pink, and he wouldn't have blinked. But Chris, he'd say things like, "You look stunning today," or "That color really brings out your eyes." It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Like he actually meant it. Like he actually saw me. And then there were the Netflix nights. At first, it was just something to pass the time while we waited for Jake. But soon it became something I looked forward to. We'd pick shows Jake would never want to watch. Romantic dramas. Crime thrillers. Even those cheesy reality shows. We'd sit there side by side on the couch, making jokes about the characters, or debating over plot twists. It felt easy, comfortable, like we'd known each other forever. But the comfort started to change. Slowly. Quietly. Almost without me noticing. One night we were watching a movie. Something neither of us had seen before. It had one of those romantic scenes. The kind that makes you hold your breath because it feels so raw. So real. I glanced at Chris just to see his reaction. And he was already looking at me. He didn't say anything. And neither did I. But in that moment, I felt something shift. Something I couldn't ignore. After that, things were different. His arm would brush against mine. And he wouldn't pull away. He started sitting closer. Close enough that I could feel the heat of his body next to mine. Once, he reached over to grab the remote. And his hand lingered on mine for just a second too long. It was subtle. But it was there. And every time it happened, my heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. Chris wasn't just attentive. He was thoughtful. He started bringing over my favorite snacks for our movie nights. Things Jake didn't even know I liked. He'd text me during the day just to see how I was doing. Or to share some random meme that made him think of me. It was all so effortless with him. So natural. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered to someone. The conversations were what really got to me. With Jake, everything was about the future. Paying bills. Saving for a house. Planning for a family. Important things. Sure. But they felt so heavy. So transactional. With Chris, it was different. We talked about dreams. Fears. Stupid things we did as kids. He'd ask me about books I loved. Places I wanted to visit. And what made me happiest in life. And he actually listened. He remembered the details. Like how I'd always wanted to go to Paris in the spring. Or how I used to love painting but hadn't picked up a brush in years. There was one night I'll never forget. It was late. Jake was still at work. And Chris and I had been binge-watching a new series for hours. At some point, the show faded into the background. And we just started talking about life. About love. About what we wanted out of both. He looked at me and said, "You deserve to be happy, Sarah. Truly happy." And in that moment, I felt like he was the only person in the world who understood me. It's hard to explain. But Chris made me feel alive. With Jake, everything felt routine. Predictable. But with Chris, every interaction felt charged. Like something exciting was just beneath the surface. Waiting to break through. Looking back, I know I should have set boundaries. I should have recognized the line we were crossing and put an end to it. Before it went too far. But I didn't. Part of me didn't want to. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was enough. There's a morning I can't stop replaying in my head. The moment everything tipped. The moment I made a choice I can't take back. Chris came by earlier than usual that day. I had just woken up. Barely out of bed. Wearing one of Jake's oversized shirts and shorts. I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't like Chris hadn't seen me looking casual before. But as soon as I opened the door, I could tell something was different. He grinned at me. That easy, confident grin of his. "Did I wake you up?" he asked. Glancing at my messy hair. I felt a little self-conscious, tugging at the hem of my shirt. "You're early," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I didn't think you'd be here for another hour." "Well, I figured you could use some company," he said, walking in like he owned the place. He dropped his gym bag on the floor and flopped onto the couch, kicking off his shoes. "Besides, it's not like I've got anywhere else to be." The morning sun was streaming through the windows, casting a golden glow across the living room. Chris patted the spot next to him on the couch, and I hesitated for a moment before sitting down. The space between us felt electric, charged with something I couldn't name. We started talking about nothing in particular at first, but then the conversation shifted. He turned to face me, his eyes intense. "You know, Sarah," he said, his voice low and serious, "I can't stop thinking about you." My heart started racing. I knew I should get up, walk away, tell him to leave. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, frozen, as he moved closer. "Chris," I whispered. But before I could say anything else, his lips were on mine. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, like he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I kissed him back. Everything after that happened in a blur. His hands were in my hair, on my waist, pulling me closer. My fingers traced the muscles of his chest, the ones Jake used to have. We didn't make it to the bedroom that first time. The couch, where Jake and I used to cuddle watching movies, became the scene of my betrayal. Afterward, as we lay there catching our breath, I should have felt guilty. I should have been disgusted with myself. But all I felt was alive, desired, wanted. Chris started coming over more frequently after that. We'd wait until Jake left for work, then spend hours together. Sometimes we'd actually watch Netflix. Other times we wouldn't even pretend. The guilt would come later, in the quiet moments when I was alone. But Chris had a way of making those feelings disappear. He'd text me things like, "You're all I think about," and "You deserve better than him." He started calling me my girl, and I let myself believe it. One day, he noticed I was still wearing my wedding ring. "Take it off," he said, his voice firm. "You're mine now." And I did. I slipped off the symbol of my vows to Jake, the promise I'd made to love him forever, and put it in my jewelry box. The affair escalated quickly. We weren't just meeting on the couch anymore. We started using the bed. My marriage bed. The one Jake and I had picked out together. Chris wanted to claim every part of my life, and I let him. I started pulling away from Jake even more. I couldn't bear his touch. His kisses felt wrong. When he'd try to be intimate, I'd make excuses. Headaches, tiredness, anything to avoid the guilt of being with him after being with Chris. Jake noticed the changes. Of course he did. He started trying harder, bringing home flowers, suggesting date nights. But by then, I was too far gone. Everything he did irritated me. I started criticizing him constantly. "You never make time for me anymore," I'd say, conveniently forgetting that I was the one pushing him away. "You've let yourself go," I'd snap. comparing him to Chris in my mind. The worst part was, Jake blamed himself. He started working even harder, trying to be better, not knowing that every extra hour he spent at the office was another hour I spent with his best friend. Chris reveled in it. He loved knowing he was taking something from Jake. "He doesn't deserve you," he'd whisper in my ear. He never did. And I believed him. I let myself believe that what I was doing was somehow justified. But then came the day everything fell apart. Jake came home early. Something he never did. I was alone. Chris had left an hour before. But Jake wasn't his usual tired self. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. "Sarah," he said. His voice barely controlled. "We need to talk." He pulled out his phone. And my world stopped. On the screen were messages. Photos. Videos. Everything. Chris had sent them all to Jake. Every intimate moment. Every betrayal. Laid bare in high definition. The messages where I called Chris baby. The photos of us together in our bed. The videos that made me want to die from shame. Jake's voice cracked as he asked, "How long?" When I didn't answer, he screamed it. "How long?" I told him everything. What else could I do? The evidence was right there on his phone. I watched as the man I'd loved since high school, the man who had given up everything for me, crumbled before my eyes. He threw his phone against the wall, shattering it. He punched the doorframe, leaving a hole in the wall. A lamp crashed to the floor. The neighbors must have heard because suddenly there were sirens. And then police at our door. They separated us. Asked if I had somewhere else to go. I nodded. Numb. I packed a small bag while Jake sat on the couch. His head in his hands. Shoulders shaking with silent sobs. As I walked out the door, he spoke one last time. "I gave you everything," he whispered. Was I ever enough? I couldn't answer him. I just walked away, leaving behind the life we'd built together. The man who had loved me more than anything. And the person I used to be. The drive to my mom's house was a blur. I kept expecting to wake up, to find out this was all a horrible nightmare. But it wasn't. This was my reality now. This was what I had chosen. My mom didn't ask questions when I showed up at her door. Mascara streaked down my face. She just hugged me and led me to my old room. The one still decorated with high school memories. Photos of Jake and me at prom. At football games. At graduation. Happy moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else. That night, lying in my childhood bed, the weight of what I'd done finally hit me. I'd destroyed not just my marriage, but the one person who had always put me first. I'd thrown away 8 years of love, trust, and devotion. For what? A few months of excitement with someone who had played me like a game? Chris kept calling, texting, trying to reach me. "We can be together now," he said. This is what we wanted. But his words rang hollow. I could finally see him for what he was. Not my savior. Not my true love. Just a man who got off on destroying his friend's marriage. The days that followed were a blur of tears and regret. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about Jake's face when he saw those messages. My mom tried to help, bringing me food I wouldn't eat, offering comfort I didn't deserve. I got a job at Starbucks, trying to save money for the divorce lawyer I didn't want to hire. Every morning, I'd make coffee for happy couples, watching them share kisses and hold hands, remembering when that used to be Jake and me. Chris wouldn't leave me alone. He kept showing up at my work, sending messages from different numbers when I blocked him. "We can start fresh," he'd say. "I'll take care of you better than he ever did." But now I could see through his words, see the manipulation I'd been blind to before. Jake's sister called me one evening, her voice cold and hard. "Do you know what you've done to him?" she asked. I stayed silent. What could I possibly say? "He's not eating," she continued. "He's lost 20 pounds. He barely speaks to anyone. He's afraid to leave the house because everyone knows what happened." Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. "He loved you more than anything," she said. "He gave up Stanford for you. He worked himself to death for you. And this is how you repaid him?" I tried to defend myself, talking about how lonely I'd been, how Jake had changed. But the words sounded hollow. Pathetic excuses for unforgivable actions. "He changed because he was trying to give you everything," she spat. "He stopped going to the gym because he was working overtime to pay for your dream house. He was tired because he was killing himself to make you happy." After she hung up, I sat in my car and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Everything she said was true. Jake hadn't changed because he stopped loving me. He'd changed because he loved me too much, sacrificed too much, trying to give me the life I thought I wanted. I started seeing Jake everywhere. In the coffee shop where we had our first date, at the park where he proposed, in every happy couple that walked by. The memories wouldn't leave me alone, torturing me with what I'd thrown away. One day, I drove past our house, the one we'd bought together. Jake's car wasn't in the driveway, but there was a for sale sign in the yard. He was selling our dream home, the one he'd worked so hard to buy for us. I pulled over and cried for hours. The divorce papers arrived a week later. Jake's lawyer had drawn them up, making it clear that Jake wanted this over quickly. He wasn't asking for anything, just a clean break. Even in this, he was being more generous than I deserved. I couldn't bring myself to sign them. They sat on my dresser, a constant reminder of my betrayal. Every morning, I'd wake up and look at them, hoping they'd somehow disappear, that this would all turn out to be a bad dream. My friends stopped calling. They'd all chosen Jake's side, and I couldn't blame them. I was the villain in this story, the one who had destroyed something beautiful for something cheap and meaningless. Chris finally showed his true colors. When he realized I wouldn't answer his calls, wouldn't meet him, he started getting angry. The sweet messages turned into threats. "I'll tell everyone what a slut you are," he texted. "I'll make sure Jake sees every video again." I blocked his number, but the damage was done. I could finally see what I'd given up Jake for. A manipulative man who had never cared about me, who had only wanted to destroy his friend's marriage. One night, after a particularly long shift at Starbucks, I found myself driving to our old gym. Jake and I used to work out there together, planning our future between sets. As I sat in the parking lot, I saw him walking out. He looked different. Thinner. Older somehow. The confident stride was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. He didn't see me, and I didn't get out of the car. I just watched him walk to his car, knowing I was the reason for his pain. That night, I finally read through all our old text messages, looked at our photos, watched our wedding video. I saw the way he looked at me, like I was his whole world. I remembered how safe I felt in his arms. His smile could make any bad day better. I thought about reaching out, trying to explain, to apologize, to beg for another chance. But what could I possibly say? How do you apologize for destroying someone's trust so completely? How do you ask forgiveness for something unforgivable? The truth is, I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve another chance. Jake gave me everything, and I threw it away for a cheap thrill, for attention from someone who never really cared about me. Now I'm left with nothing but regret. Sitting in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of a life I destroyed. Jake will move on eventually. Find someone who deserves his love, his loyalty, his heart. And I'll have to live with what I did, knowing I had everything, and threw it away. They say you don't know what you have until it's gone. But that's not true. I knew what I had. I just didn't think I could lose it. I was wrong. So here I am, telling my story. Not to gain sympathy, not to justify my actions, but as a warning to others. Love isn't always exciting. It isn't always passionate. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, reliable. And sometimes, that's worth more than all the excitement in the world. I lost the greatest love I'll ever know. And I have no one to blame but myself. End.